Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, rather. My name is Kim Dorman, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. I just want to take a few moments to orient you to this space. Below, you can see we have several buttons. We have a poll button that's asking you how you found out about this event. Ingrid Reed generously organized these events, and often she does this for the Princeton Adult School. The Adult School very generously agreed to partner with the Princeton Public Library so that we could offer these programs for free to everybody. So we want to give thanks to them right at the start. You'll see there's also a want more information about voting button. This takes you to the library resource page, which will hopefully answer many of your basic questions about voting. We've also listed the other event that we're doing with the League of Women Voters, as well as the other two events that we're doing with Ingrid Reed. You can also see that there's an Ask a Question button at the bottom. That will be up for the entirety of the program. You can ask questions throughout the program. It won't be interrupting. If you see a question that you also want the answer to, feel free to upvote it, and that will rise it to the top, and we know that you want that question asked. The chat, which is to the sidebar, we're going to turn that off during the program so it's not distracting, but we will re-enable it towards the end. And now housekeeping is done. I'm very pleased to introduce Ingrid Reed. I think most of you already know her, but Ingrid Reed is a policy analyst focusing on New Jersey civic affairs. She directed the New Jersey project at Rutgers Eagleton Institute of Politics from 1996 until she retired in June 2010. Currently, Reed chairs the board of NJSpotlight.com, a civic journalism website designed to provide coverage of current state issues important to its communities. She also serves on the board of New Jersey Future, of which she is a founder and its first senior fellow. Past activities include chairing the Governor's Task Force on Local Government Ethics and the Capital City Redevelopment Corporation from its inception under Governor Kane in 1997 until 2010. Without further ado, please welcome Ingrid Reed, who will introduce the rest of the program.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for all you do to make it possible for people to learn and meet interesting people at the library and now in the atmosphere someplace. I feel like I'm back there having your voice and seeing your face. The first thing I need to do is say something about my introduction, because it's a really great way of introducing our two journalists who are with us tonight. I did chair the board of NJ Spotlight when it started. And John Mooney, who's with us tonight, is the founding editor, and Colleen joined very soon after. And for 8 years, it stood alone and made a big impression on New Jersey, focusing on issues, all the material done by journalists, none of this bringing stuff in from other people and putting it up. And then a wonderful thing happened, that a partnership was formed with NJTV. And now I think today may be one of the first times that John Mooney and Colleen O'Dea, who is the senior editor, and she's the data person. If you love the maps that are up on NJ Spotlight, that's Colleen's work, are now fully joined with NJTV, which we watch in Princeton on Channel 23, and is now known as njspotlightnews.org. So go and visit them. And they're here because that site has probably the best election coverage, where it's not only how to vote, but it's information that's put together so you know who's on the ballot, which is very hard to find in New Jersey, and then the kind of coverage that's done daily of what's going on in the election. So I'm delighted that John Mooney and Colleen O'Dea have come to Princeton symbolically, and that we can congratulate them on this wonderful collaboration with NJTV, our public television station in New Jersey. We promised that we would focus on the ballot. And I think if you don't mind, let's make good on that ballot. And talk about
our ballots.
You brought it. Good for you. And remind people that you have to look on both sides, right?
Yes, that will be part of our
definitely.
conversation.
Okay. A lot of people have said to me, at least, how should I vote on the ballot questions? And why are they ballot questions anyway? I thought that those kinds of things were taken care of in the legislature, and I never got a chance to say anything about it. So if you don't mind, I'd like to make good on our promise that we would talk about the ballot questions and do that in the order on which they're on the ballot. And I'll let Colleen and John both feed into this and sort of tell us, why is this on the ballot? And that would be a way of getting to what you make of it and if you want to vote yes or no. So we're going to start with legalized marijuana, which, believe it or not, I guess something like 30 states have. And it's not something unusual, but it is new for us. And I think that if it passes as a constitutional amendment, people say, why is this in the Constitution? It joins other things like gambling and the lottery in that section, right? So who wants to jump in and say, what do they really want to know here from us? Why is it on the ballot?
Well, I'll start on that one only, and certainly Colleen chime in. First of all, thank you very much for having us. And big kudos to Ingrid, who has really led Spotlight from the beginning. As I've told this story before, she was the very first person we met with when this was just an idea, and she has stayed with us and been our fearless leader all these years, and couldn't even get away from us when we were sold off to WNET, because she's on their advisory board and now is the chairman of their advisory board. So once our leader, forever our leader. And thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this for the folks of Princeton. The history of how marijuana is soon, I think, soon to be a part of the New Jersey Constitution goes back to, you raised the point that why isn't the legislature taking a matter up like this? They tried, and they've tried a couple times, but most recently last year, and they couldn't get it passed. It was politically a very tough sell, especially during election year when I think the entire assembly was up for vote, up on the ballot, and it wasn't going over well in enough districts that they could get the votes for it. And so there was a real intent, I think, to try to get it done legislatively because, Colleen, you can correct me on this, but most of these other states that have done so have done it by referendum.
And everybody has.
Yeah. And there was a wish to, let's do this legislatively where we can set some of the rules and set some of the conditions of it. They couldn't get it passed. And so they basically gave up. And largely the proponents of it knew that it probably would pass, as it has in these other states, by vote, by referendum vote. And in this state, that referendum vote gets it into our Constitution. So it will be a constitutional right, like others that we see as more fundamental, maybe. But that's the way a lot of things get added to our Constitution, like gambling and the lottery.
So, Colleen, what is the other part of this? Why was there a concern about this issue, and what do people think needs to happen if we approve this? Aren't the people who are not happy about it very concerned about other issues that are related to marijuana?
Yeah, so there are several other issues that are part of this. Especially for the African American community, there's this whole question about the uneven carrying out of justice, and that folks have been, a white kid can, teenager can have a joint, and the cop kind of lets him go. If a black child does, however, there are consequences, and he winds up in juvie. And that just, the more that you have, the worse that gets. So there's been a parallel effort to try to change sentencing laws in the state that have also been proven kind of tough to do, which, given the makeup of the legislature and Governor Murphy being, pretty progressive, has been kind of strange. So that's one of the concerns. And then there are some very conservative folks who just think, it is a gateway drug. Oh, it's gonna, it would lead to all sorts of problems.
Right. But the challenge then would be, if we pass it, you do have to do something about people who have already been indicted and are in prison, and what do you do about changing the laws? Is that the next step? And it could have been in this question, but it wasn't. Right.
Right. No, that is the next step. Well, it's one of a couple of next steps. There will have to be a change, because it would be completely unfair to let people going forward, possess a certain amount of marijuana and not be charged. But other people are, in jail for it. The other thing that needs to happen is that then there has to be this whole process of how do we regulate it, who sells it, where is it sold, how is it taxed?
Right.
Governor Murphy had this a tax on marijuana in his budget, a year, 2 years ago, thinking it would have passed, and it didn't. Right. So we had to take that money out. And as
tax, in other words, it's like the cigarette tax. It really does generate revenue.
Right. And certainly at this point, the state needs revenue.
And I think correct me if I'm wrong, it was about $500 million that he put in the budget, didn't he?
It was a lot of lot of money.
I mean, it was not a small amount, and it was a bit of an estimate, and he used it to try to sell his budget. But there's no doubt, to that point, money is very much an issue here, not just for the state, but also there's some fairly big private corporate interests in this as well. It does very well for these businesses, and you're seeing, at least in other states, but I believe they may be part of this campaign as well. You're seeing some large, including liquor and beer companies, who have put money towards this. So it's and that has been one of the arguments that you hear coming from some of its critics, especially in the African American community, that this is really more about the money than about the social justice.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that is covering this whole thing, and why we're doing this program on October 7th, is that people are voting right now. And so at this point, I don't think there's very much evidence of a campaign for this, and people don't really know that big money interests are pushing this. Let's jump to one I think that's pretty easy, and that is the one extending the peacetime veterans get the same kind of tax deduction that veterans from that established wars do. And I think that's going to cost money, because obviously it's money that won't be that'll have to come out of the budget as a deduction. But basically, would you say that most people would think this was a fair thing to do?
These things are usually, slam dunks. There was a similar question on the ballot last year that extended a property tax deduction to veterans living in continuing care retirement homes, as opposed to just their own home. Right. If you moved from your own home into such a retirement facility, your tax deduction would follow you. And people are very supportive of veterans, and so these things usually pass fairly easily. And $250 is not a lot of money per person.
Let's jump to the third one, which is really hard to explain, about the schedule for redistricting.
This is why you had Colleen on this panel, so she can explain it.
This is your channel.
On my screen right now.
Can you explain this with the lead sentence to a story so that people know what it's all about?
Okay, let me read it. New Jersey public question number 3 asks voters whether to postpone the redrawing of state legislative district lines for 2 years if the Census Bureau delivers the state's population counts late. That's my lead.
Right.
I won't be sticking with it, but that's where it stands so far.
Okay.
So it is.
And so what does that mean?
It's almost a certainty that we're not going to get census data, our population counts, early next year. There's a lot of debate about the timing that is in this question, which is February 15th, which would be early for us to get the data, frankly. But normally we get it around early to mid-March. And then what happens is we have this committee of 10 people, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, who somehow are expected to, within 60 days, agree to a map. to redraw district boundary lines. The lines need to be changed because as people have moved into the state, out of the state, or around the state, they're no longer roughly equal. And according to the Constitution, just like the federal Constitution, they need to be equal because you want equal representation as much as possible. So the question is, do we wait if we don't get the census numbers in time to have a regular primary and then a general election? Do we wait until 2023 to have those new boundaries take effect, which essentially would give all of the current incumbents, should they choose to run again, an advantage, because incumbents typically have an advantage. They know their district.
They wouldn't be running in a differently configured district.
Right. So they would be in their same district next year, but then the district boundaries would change. It would be a new district for 2023. What the opponents say is that those 2 years, well, it depends. Their Republican opponents say the Democrats are doing this because they just want to keep, their strong majorities for another 2 years. But what some activists who are really, good government kind of people are saying, the problem is that this, for one thing, February 15th is a date that's too early. We wouldn't get our data by then anyway. As long as we would get the numbers by, let's say, June 1st, which is possible, we could still have a shortened election season, a shortened primary, and a short and change next year to allow that equal representation to take place when it should, next year's, and not have to wait 2 more years.
It has happened that we have done that.
Yes.
We did it this year. We had our primary in July rather than June.
Yes.
So it's up to you to decide if you think it's a good idea to take longer and let your current legislators stay in office for more than another 2 years, or whether you want to say, get on with it and let's have fair districts. Is that?
That's exactly it. It does not, none of it affects I think the broader problem that a lot of people recognize about the whole process that we use, which is this whole idea of 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans who are never going to agree on district boundaries. And then this 11th person gets named, and it's just, there are a whole lot of proposals up that would make the process better.
And several years ago, another question on the ballot about reforming redistricting.
Yeah, right.
Okay. John, do you have anything you want to say about that?
No, it's just, it reminds me of a multitude of measures that protect the incumbents and in this state. And certainly this is, falls within that. I appreciate Colleen explaining it to us. Hopefully she can continue to do that through the month. But it is very complicated. Redistricting is one of the important pieces of the census, and why the census needs to be counted accurately every 10 years, beyond just the federal money and the state money that gets distributed, but it truly determines on the distribution of those votes as well. So it is important, but it is also complicated. And the pandemic it's just yet another way that the pandemic has upset things lately. The census, as we all know, is being delayed because of it, and here's another place where it's disrupted.
Also, that if you vote yes on this, it's not just for this election. It basically says that every time we do this, and it's late, without really defining what late is, we would do the same thing. And I guess people have questioned whether you had to go that far to put that in the Constitution.
Thank you for adding that. Yes, you're absolutely right.
We, of course, at the top of the ticket have whether we want to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And it's not at all clear that there's an active campaign in New Jersey, but we do have also a race for U.S. Senate, and that Cory Booker is running again. And this would be, I guess, his second full term, because he filled out another term. And we haven't heard very much about his challenger, except I think you did a story today, didn't you, on
Rick Maida?
Rick.
Yes, and you would somebody say I think it's important to know that there is a Republican challenger, that he won the primary, and this is a person I think that the Republican Party thinks has potential. I think Chris Christie has supported him, and we don't really know very much about him. So can you help people understand who thinks that he would be a better senator than Cory Booker?
Yeah, as you said that there's not much of a presidential campaign. Boy, there is certainly not much of a Senate campaign either here.
Well,
and
we know who the candidates are for president. We don't know who the candidates are for U.S. Senate.
For certain, while he has Republican support, he doesn't have really any money behind him at this point. And I think that's due to the fact that we have not elected a Republican to the U.S. Senate in more than 40 years. It's going to be closer to 50 years, actually. So
I brought a little visual aid here. I don't have the senators, but I do have one page showing how New Jersey does vote for Republicans and Democrats for president and for governor. So we're not a sure blue state, haven't been over the time, but we are sort of now. Can you see this? It's a little graphic, but
I was going to say, look at that, Ingrid.
Anything. It's just the red and the blue that we in New Jersey vote for Republicans as well as for Democrats at the top of the ticket. So, but it seems like this campaign, there isn't that kind of support. Even the kind of support that Christy Whitman got when she ran against Bill Bradley and gave him a run for the money. I guess, let's tell again who this person is. Can you give some background on him?
Go ahead, Colleen.
So his name is Rick Mehta. He lives in Mendham, actually, so he's a neighbor of Chris Christie's. He's a biotech guy. He's worked in pharmaceuticals. He's an entrepreneur. He's been involved in a whole bunch of businesses. So he comes from, that kind of business and tech side, healthcare side, and he does not have a lot of money at this point. He's not. I mean, he's not a John Corzine or a Bob Hugin. You'll remember 2 years ago, Hugin spent $36 million. I think 31 or 32 million of it was his own money. So people knew who Bob Hugin was because he could do that and get out there. This, Rick Mehta is really kind of struggling. We don't have the actual fundraising totals yet. They should be released soon. But he's having a tough time getting his word out there. But his policies are pretty much what you'd expect from a Republican candidate, in terms of smaller government, less smaller government, less, I'm blanking on the word, but fewer regulations, that those kind of policies.
He's an entrepreneur. Yeah. So,
and, he's got a really tough, road ahead of him, because it's just, this is an expensive state to campaign in. If you don't have money to get your message out there, and he's kind of struggling to do that. He also got some, I don't know if I should call it negative publicity, but it seems like negative attention this week when he was asked about attending Trump's fundraiser in Bedminster, which he did attend, and asked if he would quarantine, and he said he didn't see a need to do so. That kind of, he got some backlash from that. So that may be the most exposure he's gotten since Labor Day, when we think of the campaign starting.
Yeah,
and he hasn't. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean,
did you want to say anything?
He also has the disadvantage of running against a very popular and charismatic incumbent, and there's a certain element of him, being the sacrificial lamb in this. Somebody has to take on, and he's not gonna. it would be nice if he could put in some of his own money. He doesn't have a whole lot of money to put in. But it does put somebody up against, Cory Booker, who, conceivably, like other candidates before him, you do this for us once and we'll help you out the next time.
Right.
So,
you can run for something else that I think
something else where you will get state money and you will get national money. But thank you very much for taking on Cory Booker, and we'll see you in a few years.
Yeah. But it's interesting that the National Republican Party hasn't come to his aid either, because I'm going to ask you to look at the congressional races that may get national attention because they are sort of unusual. But one of the things that I think we've seen on television is that both of the political parties have decided that they should spend money on ads supporting candidates for Congress, mainly those members who had served their first term, were elected in 2018, and or have the potential of turning back to being Republican, or as far as the Democrats are concerned, is keeping their seats. And there's been quite a bit of money that's come into the state in supporting ads that some people are really concerned about. In the Princeton area, Bonnie Watson Coleman is the member in the House, but I think Princetonians have been asked to look both south and north and support people who are running there. And in both cases, there's a lot of money coming in from outside. So the Kim race and the Republican challenger, whose name I've forgotten,
David Rick.
that was a very slim win for Kim. And then we have Tom Malinowski being challenged by Tom Kean. But I guess the seat that is getting the most attention and is most interesting is in the very southern part of our state, where, Colleen, you're going to be on the panel for the debate. And there's good reason why that should be a national interest. Maybe you want to just tell the story of that race, so that if people hear from a cousin in Illinois about who is this person that changed from being a Democrat to a Republican, they'll know what you're talking about. So,
and give a plug, Colleen, give a plug for the debate. This is your.
Yes. So tomorrow night, NJ Spotlight News is going to be hosting this live debate out of Atlantic City with Jeff Van Drew, the incumbent Republican congressman in the 2nd District, and Amy Kennedy, yes, that Kennedy family, who is the Democratic challenger against him. So Jeff Van Drew was elected in 2018, just like, Tom Malinowski, Andy Kim, and Mikey Sherrill. For the first time, they flipped districts from red to blue. Van Drew replaced Frank Lobiondo, longtime Republican moderate down there. A lot of Democrats and progressive groups worked really, really hard to get Van Drew elected, because it is a district that tends to, lean more on the conservative side. And Van Drew was known there, but a lot of people put a lot on the line for him. And, fast forward to December of 2019, and we've got impeachment talks, and the House is going to take this up, and lo and behold, this is one of those things it's crazy. I will remember, I guess, for my life. I was driving actually to Trenton to cover something that day, and I heard on NPR, 2 votes against impeachment, 2 Democratic votes against impeachment, 1 Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey. I said, oh boy, I guess I know what I'm doing instead today. And then he was one of 3 to vote against the 2nd article impeachment. Very, very soon after that, he came out and said, well, the Democrats are essentially bullying me for not voting for impeachment, so I'm going to change parties and I'm going to become a Republican. And then he appeared in the Oval Office with Trump, the very highly publicized photo op, and said, he essentially gives his undying loyalty to the president. That made a lot of people angry, and they are still very angry. And that would seem to show in the poll that we got earlier this week, the Monmouth University poll, which shows that Kennedy is ahead, 49 to 44 for Van Drew. So,
well, the Kennedy part of this, Amy Kennedy, I know you've interviewed her. She's been on NJTV, on with NJ Spotlight, is really a Kennedy by marriage, right? But she's not just married to a Kennedy. She's from an Atlantic City political family. She has roots there. Atlantic City is the largest town. So she has some credibility among the local political leadership. And she very handily win the primary with that support?
It wasn't as close as some would think. Bridget Harrison was her closest challenger. And so, she is married to Patrick Kennedy, who is the son of Ted, former U.S. Senator, and himself a former representative in Rhode Island. And she herself is a school teacher, I believe, but has been able to raise quite a bit of money, largely, and you've made the point that a lot of money is being spent in these congressional races, but not in the Senate race or the like. And it's largely because these congressional races are tight. And, the money makes a difference. So neither party is going to be spending a lot of money in a Booker Mehta race, because it's just not all that much of a nail biter. But this one is. And Van Drew, we all covered him in the state Senate. He was on the education committee, so I got to know him pretty well. Always more conservative. I mean, he certainly was more conservative than the typical Democrat in the state house, and on a bunch of issues, guns included. But as Colleen said, it is a fairly conservative district, and so there was no doubt that his decision. And Colleen wrote a great piece about this. His decision to back Trump on the impeachment vote wasn't national politics; it was local politics. And he thought he was making a bet that this would go over better with his district. And he got Trump to visit for a fundraiser or a rally, and got his handshake. I think his timing could have been better. I mean, he sort of picked Trump. He picked Trump at a low point of sorts, and clearly, I think he may rue the day further. But he was always, he always was certainly more middle of the road, if not, to the right on most policies. So, he may have ended up where he belongs in that sense, but it also may cost him because, as Colleen said, it did not go over well at all with his, the people who stuck their neck out in that conservative district to get him elected. And then all of a sudden he's not returning their phone calls, I assume. So it's a fascinating race, and tomorrow night's debate should be very interesting. They're both compelling candidates.
Can I just ask Colleen, you can't tell us what questions you're going to ask because you don't want the candidates to know, but I don't think there are going to be any other debates among the congressional candidates. What do you think are like the important questions to ask that are relevant to New Jersey? Like, what are you going to do for us? Is it getting money for the tunnel? But you don't have to answer it if you already have decided you're going to ask those questions, so we don't want to tip anybody off. But it seems to me that if people are returned to Congress, there's really going to be an expectation, especially if there's a Democrat that's president, that New Jersey's going to get something out of this.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that would be the case, and certainly, I mean, not in the case of the 2nd District because that's South Jersey. Although certainly, I would think that a Democrat in South Jersey would support the tunnel, and Jeff Van Drew might as well. But I mean, certainly, and I spoke with Cory Booker just yesterday, in fact, about his campaign, because I'll be doing a story about the Senate race. And he was saying that his greatest disappointment in office for his first term was Trump coming in and just killing the tunnel, because, he and others had worked so hard to get the money for that, particularly when Chris Christie was not a fan of it when, he came in. So it's, that is something that clearly the state needs. There's a lot of other infrastructure needs. I mean, we're constantly at the bottom or near the bottom of states that get banged back for our buck that we send to Washington. And the other thing I think that is people are talking about is the return of the SALT deduction, because we lost that as part of tax reform. So that's something else that a lot of, at least the Democrats are pledging to do.
I'll add one more is Obamacare.
Yes.
And a big issue in all of these races is what's going to happen next, especially given the court. It looks like the court is headed one way on that. So if it comes back to them, that will be back on the table. And certainly coming out of a pandemic, hopefully we'll be coming out of a pandemic. That will be a big concern of folks. All things healthcare, I think, will be a big concern of folks, but specifically around that. And then the pandemic itself. And, we see what's happening in Congress right now, another stimulus bill or not, and whether they're negotiating today. I think the president changed his mind 3 times, so I'm not quite sure where he is. But that's going to be, there's going to, for New Jersey, it matters a lot in terms of how the federal government's going to react to that. Because without federal help, schools are going to suffer. All kinds of things are going to suffer, and we've already been hit pretty hard, as we all know. So there's a bunch of policy issues that are at stake here.
Yeah, and I can say thanks to you, John, for the pioneering work you did on NJSpotlight News covering the pandemic and doing your midnight story so that we wake up in the morning, we know what happened the day before. So thank you for that. I want to get to the questions from the listeners, but there still are a lot of questions about vote by mail. And I know you did a story on how the campaigns have changed. We all know that it makes a difference of when somebody gets in touch with you when you fill out your ballot the day after it arrives. But one of the questions that comes up, and it's not clear, and maybe it's not fair to ask you, but people ask about the ballots being counted that they're sending in right now, and how does that really work? And I guess the bottom line is, how do they keep it a secret of what the vote is? And maybe they don't even total up the batch every day, but can you help our viewers be, I guess, comforted that they don't have to worry about the early count getting into hands that it shouldn't?
I reviewed this today because I knew you wanted to ask it, and I spoke to some great county board of election folks about this. So what's happening right now, when your ballot comes in, and it's going to be in the outside envelope, what will happen right away is that they will open this, take it out of the outside envelope so that these two are separated.
Right.
The good thing about doing that now is that if you made a mistake here, like you detached the certificate, please don't detach the certificate.
You can't take the flap off. No.
It wants to come off. It really does, but don't take it off. If you didn't sign, if you made any mistakes here, they know from your information here who you are, and they can send you that cure letter, which is going to say, hey, you made a mistake. Did you really vote this ballot? And you can fix that. Now, this is not going to be open until 10 days before the election. So not every county has to do the early count. I think a lot of them are, just because they're going to be overwhelmed on election day. But so when they do that, they're going to open up this envelope and they're going to pull out your ballot. This envelope is going to go in one direction. Your ballot goes in the other direction. We're going to flatten it and stack a whole bunch more on it. Now, you didn't sign this, so hopefully you didn't sign it.
Okay.
So nobody knows whose ballot this is, and these are just gonna stay in a spot until they're ready to throw them in the machine. Now, some counties are starting right away on 10 days, and other counties are waiting to kind of just let these flatten out, because the machines that they put them through can process a couple hundred ballots in a minute, which I think is kind of incredible.
Right.
So
that's why you have to stay in the lines when you put the little blue, black dot on there.
yes, you're right. That's why you have to stay in the line. If you don't, if there's a mistake, the machine is going to toss your ballot out to the side, and then election workers are going to hand count that is what will happen. So the machines are, these separate little devices, and all that they tell is, you put 200 ballots in, we process 200. It does not give a count. You would have to ask the machine to give you a count. And you would have to know how to ask the machine to give you a count. And that's not going to be the average person who's feeding the ballots through. And I've been assured by, some, elections workers that there will be no counts taken. And actually it's in law now that you cannot take any count. You cannot ask for a tally before election day.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. All right.
I think I covered all the bases, I hope.
Yeah. Somebody said, show me in writing. I said, well, I'll ask. How's that?
Visit NJSpotlight, and we have more than you'll ever need on how to vote in the mail-in election.
Yes.
So,
Okay. All right.
Colleen is really knows more about this than anybody. So it's,
right. There's a tab when you go across the top that says Election 2020, and then you click on that, and there's everything in there. Okay, let me turn to Kim Dorman, who's been collecting questions.
Well, so far we just have one question.
Oh my.
But that might also be because people get shy. So please remember that you can ask a question at the bottom in the Ask a Question feature, and I'll also enable the chat if people feel more comfortable with that one. So the question is, how do you think, and you sort of touched on this, how do you think the pandemic has influenced at all this election?
Oh, I think it's influenced it in many regards, and continues to, it seems. I mean, certainly it has really been the issue that has been in the forefront of folks' minds on the national level, and how the federal government reacted. There are other issues, and Donald Trump, brings other issues to the table as well. But I think there's certainly a lot of questions about how he handled it early on, and how the federal government as a whole handled it, and then in the months to come, as we continue to grapple with whether to lock down or open schools or the like. And so I think it's an enormous issue. This is a once in a lifetime event. This is akin to a war or a 9/11 type of and it's going to reshape our politics in many regards. And I think it will certainly influence it. Certainly, and Colleen wrote about this. It certainly has changed how people campaign. You're not seeing people going door to door at all, and some of that retail politics that that we're so known and used to. I mean, that has changed. It's all become very virtual. You saw these conventions taking place on your computers and how that worked. I just think, and I'm a longtime education writer, and it certainly has transformed schools in many ways. And so I think it will continue to, even as we come out of it, whenever that is, and however that is defined. I think we're going to have this is going to be, hovering over us for years to come.
Colleen, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, John's absolutely right. And certainly we would not have this discussion about voting by mail if it weren't for the pandemic as well. And, this has been and continues to be very controversial among some folks. It pretty much, falls along party lines in that there are, Republicans who keep calling for open, let us vote in person. Well, you can. I mean, everybody should know that. But you're going to essentially get this same ballot if you go to vote in person.
Right.
Only instead of saying mail-in ballot, it's going to say provisional ballot. So there's not a great, unless you like going out to the polls to see folks, which again you have to social distance. It's really it's certainly brought a lot of tension in the state in that respect among folks who, I think at least early on in the pandemic, were trying to get along. Probably the best that we've seen. There was some legislation that passed really quickly through the legislature to provide whatever relief that the state could. That passed, almost unanimously, which is kind of unheard of.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, Colleen, but I think in 2016, I didn't know this until today when I was preparing for this, 40% of the vote nationally was either mail-in or early ballots.
So there are some states.
Yeah, everyone thinks that this is some new thing, but 40% is quite a bit. There's some states that only do, Colorado and
Oregon,
others.
Washington,
Nevada, I think. Yeah. So there are some states, and we have a form of early voting, not like other states have. It's essentially using a mail-in ballot. I did it once because I wanted to be able to write about it and explain, what it is and what it's like to do that. But it's not like you get to go to a place and there are machines open and you vote that way, which there has been a push to do in the state. But a lot of other states do have that early voting so that, people would be casting ballots. But, as far as our last count, I think we're up to at least 100,000, if not more. I would think more by now because it's been a couple of days who've already voted. Those ballots have come in.
Well, we have many more people registered. We had about 5.5 million people going into 2016 registered in New Jersey. And I believe we're close to 6.5 million people registered now. So that's 1 million people over this 4-year period. The other thing that's interesting is that for a long time, there's been criticism of the old-fashioned, click, draw the curtain and click, because when you vote by that kind of a machine, first of all, there are people who say they can be hacked, but there's no way that if something goes wrong that you can audit or count the ballots. It's gone. But in this election, we are doing what advocates are saying is the safest and the fastest way of voting, and that is fill in the little dot and run it through a machine, because you then have a paper ballot. And it seems to me no one's really been talking about that as we've made this change overnight. And it'll be interesting to see what happens next. The other thing, since you watch New Jersey politics, it's likely that the gubernatorial race next year will still be on the pandemic. Would you think so?
Oh yeah, and I think Phil Murphy thinks so too. He's really making it. He's becoming a national figure of sorts for how he's treated it. And whether you like it or not, there's certainly a lot of folks who think that the lockdowns were too severe and have hurt the economy more than it needed to be, and others who think he didn't move fast enough early on. So I very much think next year, and it's going to be here in no time. As we know, these things fly by. Will be a referendum on how this governor treated this, as well as what came out of it. As you all know, he enacted a very unusual budget this year, a pandemic era budget, which was his. I don't know if it was. Maybe I'm sounding a little too cynical, but he got his millionaire's tax, something that was really a very significant goal of his when he ran for governor. And, with the pandemic and clearly the state in some real dire straits financially, this was an opening where he got support. I was surprised how fast he got support, to be honest with you. And it makes me wonder what else got traded that we haven't quite seen yet. But that's New Jersey, so it keeps us going.
Let me just turn to Kim. Did anybody else ask a question?
Yes, happily we did. I think that the most common questions we're getting generally at the library and in this chat are about practical things about voting by mail and voting in the election. So I'm going to put two together with this question is, how do you recommend people submit their ballot? Mail, Dropbox, in person? And then that's from Sonal Tanaja. And then Richard Dinek asks, will all polling places be opened? And how will voting process work with provisional ballots?
So I would say if you mail in your ballot early, You can use the mail and it should get there in time. But we did have this instance of a postal service worker being charged today, in fact, and these were ballots that weren't going to the county, but they were going to individuals to use. And so he was charged with tossing mail, including these ballots. So the drop box is a really safe and secure way to do it if you don't mind taking a trip to wherever your closest drop box is, as long as it's in your county. So if everybody's in Mercer County, it could be any drop box in Mercer County, but not outside the county, because the ballots are counted at the county level.
And you can find out where the drop boxes are on NJSpotlight.
Right. So if you go to that elections page that Ingrid talked about, on the right-hand side, you will see a whole bunch of links to helpful information. We've got a Q&A about how to vote. We've got places to check whether you're registered. We've got a place to check once you send your ballot in, so that you can track it to see that it made it there, and eventually to make sure that it was counted. And then we've got links for the Dropbox locations and the polling locations. So roughly half the polling locations in each county will be open, at least one in every municipality, except I think one that has 4 residents. They're going to vote next door, in the town next door. But so at least one location, though, in just about every place. And you should be getting, you can look that up now through our website, on the county Board of Elections website, or the county clerk's office might have it as well. But you also should be getting in the mail by the end of the month a postcard, is what we got, maybe a letter that tells you where your polling location is.
And
Provisional ballots, right? So the reason if you go in person, you'll essentially wait online like you do. But instead of going to a machine, you'll be handed a what is essentially the vote by mail ballot, but it will say provisional ballot on it, and you will do the same thing that you're doing if you vote by mail, which is color in the circles with a red, a blue or a black. And yes, and put it in an envelope and hand it to an election worker. Those cannot be counted until after all of the mail-in ballots are counted, because they need to make sure that you haven't voted twice, that you didn't mail in your mail-in ballot from home and then decide to go in person and vote again. So those will not start to be counted until at least a week after the election, because we've given that much time for ballots to get through the Postal Service in case there are delays. So those won't be counted until the Tuesday, I think it's about 2:00, the Tuesday after election, or Wednesday, the day after, a week after the election.
What if you do? I have a question now, if I'm allowed. What if you did vote by mistake twice? What happens? Are they both nullified, or?
No, so if you voted mail-in and then provisional, the provisional ballot would be tossed, because the mail-in ballot has already been counted.
It's already been counted. I get it.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Is there a detach sign on the provisional ballot as well, or do not detach?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. So
There
follow the instructions. That's a lesson there.
I would think there must be, because you do have the same cure procedure for provisional ballots as you have with mail-in ballots. If you make a mistake, they will let you know about it, and you would have up until it's 48 hours before the results are certified, which is, I think, November 20th.
I've received a couple of questions.
Kim, can we go a little bit later?
Yes, if that's okay with all of you.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So I have a couple of questions about sort of scheduling and timing, and when should they feel concerned, if that's appropriate. So Adelaide says, I put my ballot in the Dropbox on Witherspoon last Monday. It is Wednesday, and the Division of Elections website does not say it has been received. And then we have Deb Lemishow, who says, I live in West Windsor and still have not received my ballot in the mail, although friends in surrounding towns did. Do you have any idea about the schedule? What is a reasonable amount of time to wait before being concerned?
So in the case of the ballot that hasn't arrived in your mailbox yet, I would give that another few days. The clerks did not have to send them out until Monday, 2 days ago. And what a lot of counties were doing were sending out, a couple towns a day or one town a day. So that town may just have been the last one that the clerk decided to send out. As for the ballot that has not been registered yet, if you put it in the Dropbox 2 days ago, I wouldn't be concerned yet. If it was last Monday, more than a week ago, then I would be concerned, and I would make a call to the county Board of Elections and say that you put this in a Dropbox. Why isn't it posted yet? Because from the information I have from the folks I've talked to, and it wasn't Mercer County, but that should have been they should be logged as soon as they come in, and the drop boxes are picked up or cleaned out once a day, at least weekdays. I'm not sure about weekends.
So that would mean that if they got picked up at 8 o'clock, then they'd have to go in the next day. By the time they sorted through them, and then they have to go and compare the signature. So it takes
it might take a couple of days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So just somebody has asked us, sorry if I missed this in the beginning, but along with legalizing marijuana, is there any discussion of changes to people's sentences if they're in jail on marijuana-related charges?
Yes,
well,
so that's
go
ahead.
That's not part of this. It's separate. And Colleen, I think, knows more than this, but separate legislation that would expunge your records, would it not? Colleen, I guess you can fill in the blanks here.
Yes, but that has nothing to do with the ballot. So it's very possible that we could get a yes on marijuana,
but it's not the ballot.
Right, but and a no, because the legislature is going to be the ones who decide on the expungement. I mean, I would think they would vote yes, but we don't. There's no certainty in that.
But it's pretty clear that if it passes, something's got to be done, and there has been a lot in the legislature, and there's a big campaign to say vote no, because we think the legislation that's been introduced should be attended to on the legalization in the law and what you do about people who are serving sentences. So there is a push for it, and some people are saying don't vote for this because we haven't done that before. But I think the two things are basically locked together. It's not going to work in New Jersey if you don't handle both sides of it. How quickly and how well, that's what we have to find out.
Yeah, and that's an important point, is if this does pass, this is not going to all start on November 4th. It's going to be a lengthy process and probably a fairly contentious one on how to set this. It's one of the big reasons the legislature couldn't do it themselves. But they're going to have that task again, or the state will. So there's this will take months, if not several months to really happen, and you won't really be seeing stores open or the like for quite a while.
We do have another question, which is, there is some editorializing in it. Tom Malinowski has received death threats because of Tom Kane Jr.'s advertisements, which are still running. Can one candidate sue the other for defamation and libel, and would that stop some of these lies being used in ads?
I'm not certain myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could, but being that he is a public figure, I think he would have a very hard. It's a much harder case to win if you're a public official, and you get sued. So both of them are public officials, and the ads for Kane, I think none of them are actually paid for by Kane.
Right.
I think they're all being paid for by either the National Republican Congressional Committee or the Congressional Leadership Fund. So Kane kind of can step aside and say, these are not mine. I'll leave it up to anyone to think for yourself whether that's the case or not. But it's certainly very concerning that he's received death threats, and I hope that the folks in that district, I happen to live in that district and have gotten tons of mailers about this too, and seen all those ads. I certainly hope that people kind of are really, reading about the race and about the background before they make a decision.
It has received a lot of coverage, so people can be informed and make a judgment about the fairness of the race.
Right.
I guess that's the way to put it. Yeah.
But your original question, anybody can be sued. It's whether the court would move on it in any kind of speed, if at all. So,
right.
There's been dirty politics for a long time, and I'm not sure that's going to stop anytime soon. It seems to have gotten worse in some regards.
Well, Kim, are you going to thank our guests?
Well, I would be delighted to thank them because I'm thrilled, as are many of the people who have attended this evening. It's been a wonderful discussion, and I thank you so much for coming out this evening, and especially with the tech issues that you've been facing. Poor John has been coming in and out briefly, but he's been here the whole time with us.
I have. I swear I've been here.
Thank you so much for staying with us and for sharing your insights. And Ingrid, as always, thank you so much for curating this and organizing this series to help all of us get better understanding.
Glad to do it. Stay tuned for the second one at the end of the month, when we'll look at what's likely to be happening in terms of the electorate. Are youth really more engaged? What are we hearing about women, and what's happening in New Jersey? And then we're going to do, instead of having a big party at the library on election night, we're going to do a retrospective 2 weeks later, and we're going to be looking ahead of what does it all mean for New Jersey when we vote again in 2021. So
You'll be here.
a lot of practice here. So thanks to John and Colleen, and I hope you'll all read what they write on the screen, and also tune in because now they're TV stars too.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Yep.
Have a wonderful evening. Good night, everybody.